Hi, my name is Hannah Jean Pritchett, current U of A GIST Master's student. Welcome to the University of Arizona GIST podcast. Our hosts are Jennifer Mason and Chris Lukenbiel, and today we will be talking with John Ehlen, a GIS Specialist for Yavapai County GIS. Let's get started.
So hello and welcome to the UAGIST podcast. My name is Chris Lukenbiel. I'm the director of the GIST programs at the University of Arizona. And today I am here with Dr. Jennifer Mason, a faculty in the GIST programs and in the School of Geography, Development, and Environment. And we're excited to have with us a recent alumni, John Ehlen from Yavapai County GIS, City of Prescott, has joined us today to talk about what he's up to since graduating, and maybe you can give us some tips and tricks for how to survive the GIST program as well. So thanks for joining us, John.
Absolutely, pleasure to be here.
Yeah, and so you graduated in 2019 from the Online GIST program, isn't that correct?
That's correct.
And since then, maybe you could tell us what your job title is and what you kind of do maybe in a day-to-day environment in that job. Since you've
Sure. So my current title is a Geographic Information System Specialist for Yavapai County GIS. The GIS department itself as a whole was spun out of IT a few years back. And so the majority of my work is heavily related to database and programming and automation, as opposed to just simple editing. So my main role is to aggregate data sets for 12 different providers within the county. And I upload those after I schema map them into the next generation 911 format for addresses and road center lines. So I was hired by the Yavapai County GIS, and half of my funding comes from the sheriff department. And my primary role is to support their VestaMap local system that the dispatchers use to dispatch emergency personnel throughout the county. And so I'm in charge of maintaining around 8,000 square miles of address points, road center lines, emergency service number boundaries, city boundaries, as well as a few other data sets such as fire hydrant locations, points of interest, and that sort of stuff.
So I was curious, kind of looking back, how you discovered GIS. It seems like, a lot of people say I discovered it in the non-traditional way, and I find more often than not that seems to be the case. So how did you find GIS and kind of enter the field?
So it was kind of entirely by accident. In my undergrad, I studied Parks and Recreation Management with an emphasis on sustainable outdoor recreation. And for one of my internships to graduate, I worked for the Army Corps of Engineers in Georgetown, Texas. And my entire job that summer was just to map the lake trail system. So I was in charge of mapping a couple hundred miles of trails around this lake. And that was my first foray into GIS. And it was really just using a handheld Trimble system. I didn't get to do much of the mapping on the back end. It was just data collection out in the desert. And I had really no idea what GIS was aside from one course I had taken in my undergraduate degree. And that course was a very brief introduction into ArcMap, and essentially it was cartography and not GIS. And then after that, I ended up working for the National Park Service in Tucson. And my job was as a field biologist, and I would lead the crew out to remote areas in the territory while the actual biologists performed field work. And we would all kind of take turns. They kind of would train me how to do botany stuff, and then I would map the transect lines and map the plot area we were doing our study in, and then navigate us back out. And then after that, I guess concurrently with that, I met someone who also worked for the National Park Service who had enrolled in the UA MSGIST program. And that was how I discovered the program, and I reached out to Chris, and that's how I kind of found my way into GIS.
And John, you have, I would say, a non-traditional higher education experience with the GIST program.
That's correct.
I think that you're a prime example of why we created the online program, though, in that you started in the in-person but moved to the online. Maybe you could tell us just a little bit about how the online, helped you to, fulfill your goal of getting the degree and also move on and continue to have a successful career? Because I think your story was very unique for other people to hear.
Absolutely. So yes, I was living in Tucson, and I had a fairly decent job down there. And I was paying out of pocket for my graduate degree. I didn't want to take out loans. And so I ended up losing my job when the department was shut down. And because of that, I opted to just take a break from continuing my coursework. It was between taking out loans and finishing my degree, or not having debt and not finishing my degree right away. And then in the interim break between my in-person and online, I had the opportunity to take a position at NAU, Northern Arizona University up in Flagstaff. And so once I was able to get the job at NAU, I moved to NAU, and I used my state tuition benefits to enroll in the MSGIST program again. And so the online program was really paramount to me finishing, because if that wasn't there, then I might not have ever got this degree. I especially probably wouldn't have got it from U of A, and I might have just ended up continuing to work doing something else. It was really a pivotal moment to be able to re-enroll in the online program and see that I had the opportunity to have the same coursework and with roughly the same flow of lesson plans and meeting with my professor via Zoom meetings or D2L conversations back and forth, group chats between all of the people in the program with me. So even though it was far removed from Tucson, hundreds of miles away, I was still able to be present on a day-to-day basis with my peers. So it was very nice in that respect.
In terms of, I guess, skill building, how do you, or what are the things that kind of you learned from the program and your education that really set you up for your career? And maybe what are some of the things that you had to kind of learn on your own, if any, new skills to do your day-to-day tasks?
Gotcha. So I would say that when I went into GIS, I was very much under the impression that the majority of GIS was cartography and cartographic work and producing pretty maps and doing cool, pretty visualizations. That is, in my experience, not so much the case. I have had the opportunity to create 3 maps since I've been working in Yavapai in the last 8 months. Well, I guess I would say 3 printed maps. I've created numerous web applications and web-based editing applications, so remote users can edit our internal data. But the majority of my work in GIS is not cartography and is not making maps. It is database design. It is data quality analysis, trying to come up with new ways to analyze data, trying to integrate various systems and automate various tasks for everyone. And I think that during my coursework, it was probably around the 5th or 6th class when I realized, whenever we hit programming, and I think, who was the teacher? I think Fernando was the teacher there, that I really realized what I had gotten myself into. And so if I had one word of advice for anyone heading into the field or heading into this program, it would really be focus as much as you can on learning everything behind the scenes. Like, yes, the end goal is making a pretty result for your end user, but everything is down to Python. Everything in GIS is moving towards automation and programming, especially if you want to be more than a GIS specialist. If you want to be an analyst or a programmer or a developer, you're going to need to have JavaScript, Esri SDK, the ArcPy, functionality down pat. You're going to need to know Python, SQL for sure. Everything I do revolves around SQL. I created my own website, and I've been dipping my toes into PHP and trying to integrate, user input from web forms into a MySQL database on the back end through PHP. And so really, I think if you want to be successful in GIS and do more than just make maps at the lowest, at the lowest tier of your job, you should really focus on programming.
So John, the last time I got to see you in person was at the Arizona Geographic Information Council conference in Prescott when you, I believe, just recently started your position there in town.
That was my second week.
It was really exciting to see you. And I guess even though that you were in the online program, I think you're a great example of success in that you continued to do things to keep yourself active in the community, such as going to AJEC, to expose yourself to opportunities. And so in your experience, like how well did the skills are one thing, but the networking seemed to really pay off for you quite well.
Absolutely.
And so what did you do in terms of trying to get yourself networked while being an online student when you were at NAU?
The first thing I did really was just reach out to various organizations that I was interested in, which involved a lot of research into the department and contacting them to find out what the actual work they did was. And I found that a lot of counties in Arizona, there's a very, very wide discrepancy in the knowledge base, maybe not the knowledge base, but the implementation of technology within their organizations. And so there's a lot of organizations who don't have, everything's done manually, everything is kind of behind the times, everything happens very slowly. And so one of the things I did was I looked for people who were more progressive in their use of technology and who also had more of an opportunity to give me opportunities to learn, someone who would provide ample time and resources for me to not only learn more for the job, but learn more just for myself and for the future. And so I think one of the most important things is really just to put yourself out there. Even if you're not applying for a job right now, it never hurts to just, send an email and ask what the department's like and tell them that you're a student who's going to be graduating soon with this degree and that you're interested in learning more about the field. And so really just reaching out to everyone you can and putting yourself out there is the best thing you can do.
And you talked about, being at a place that would allow you to continue learning, and in GIS, that is kind of essential with technology changing all the time. So I'm curious if there are, specific training that you guys do in your department, or even, maybe there's blogs, forums, or Twitter that you even frequent to kind of stay up to date with where technology is going and, kind of even what new skills you think are essential for students to learn if you're seeing new changes.
Yeah, one of the things that in terms of new changes, I would say is dive headfirst into ArcGIS Pro, especially with the update 2 days ago or 3 days ago, 2.6. They have improved everything that I absolutely hated about ArcGIS 2.5. They've made the workflows very simpler. They've made some of the toolboxes that were previously nested as floating windows that can run concurrently with geoprocessing tasks. They fixed a bunch of geocoding issues. They've really made the program as a whole awesome. And we have this kind of discrepancy in Yavapai GIS where we have developed a lot of custom tools that are, a nice button in ArcMap. And so our end users don't have to know, in our addressing department and our centerline editing department, the end users don't have to know how to do these heavy geoprocessing tasks or how to connect to our databases through SQL statements or how to do these complex workflows. All they have to do is click a button and choose the common name of this table they're looking for. And in the back end, it performs all the joins and creates new features and populates their map for them. And we haven't been able to replicate that functionality in Arc Pro yet because it requires you to use their SDK and actually program the entire functionality yourself. So that's one thing I would say that absolutely, if you're talking about technology, you need to learn ArcGIS Pro because everything is moving towards web GIS and REST services, and Pro is able to bring those in and seamlessly export them back out to the web with no fuss like ArcMap is. But aside from that, really, the main resources I use are just, GeoNet and GIS Stack Exchange. And it's really just, if you have a question, someone has figured it out before, no matter what it is. and maybe they haven't figured out your exact question, but if you break your question down into logical steps, someone has done step 1, step 2, and step 3, and you could do your end result. And if they haven't, someone will respond to your question if you post it, which is invaluable. And then in terms of the learning resources here at Yavapai, there's actually 10% of my work time on my job description is dedicated to learning and exploration of new things. And so I'm heavily encouraged by my supervisors to, if I see something that I think is cool, run towards it and explore it. And so right now I am working with the ArcGIS Pro crime analyst solution and messing around with some of the crime data from Yavapai County Sheriff's Office because I have my CGIS certification and I'm able to look at all that data.
So, John, how many people compose the Yavapai County GIS?
I believe there are 7 of us and 1 volunteer, 6 of us not counting our director.
Okay. And is it service-based allocation in terms of what people do, or is it different departments?
So we have 3 people who are programmer analysts 2, 1 person who is a programmer analyst 1, 2 GIS specialists, and a director and a volunteer. And so we are all kind of tailored into different areas. And a couple of the people have been here since the department spun out of IT. And so one person is mainly in charge of the databases. And so he stands up, right now we're migrating from a SQL 14 database to a SQL 16 database. And he's the one who stands the database up, sets user permissions, sets user roles, does all that kind of stuff. And since he's been here the longest, he kind of directs everyone else in terms of what to do, at least the people who haven't been here as long as him and the director have. We have another person who is solely in charge of pretty much of maintaining the elections database, performing a task related to elections, and maintaining our Yavapai GIS interactive map online, which is a fairly comprehensive resource for zoning, parcel information, contours, anything you could possibly imagine wanting to pull out of a city database. It's pretty much an interactive map. And so he is pretty much 90% dedicated to maintaining that system. As I mentioned, I work 50% of my job. It has to be charged to the Sheriff's Department because 50% of my funding comes from there. And so my job primarily is to maintain the VestaMap local sheriff dispatch system. And that is just aggregating data and then QA/QCing data, generating error reports for the various counties, or not the various cities within our county, and then schema mapping that to the Next Gen 911 format, which is a National Emergency Number Association standard, and then populating that into the Sheriff Map monthly. We have another user who she does mostly work for flood control, and half of her budget comes from flood, and so she works on a bunch of flood control projects, web maps. We have and her and another coworker of mine collaborate a lot on the Community Wildfire Protection Plan, and that is a big project here that Yavapai is working on. So they're continuously working with fire departments, updating the boundaries of these, and maintaining this huge web map, story map that is now being transitioned from an ArcGIS classic story map to their new versions of story maps and experience builder stuff. And so we all kind of have our own little niche, if you will, of where we fit in and what we do for the department.
So looking back and kind of thinking about the trajectory that you took, you've given us a lot of advice on skills. If you could go back, is there anything that you would change, based on the trajectory that you took?
Going back to programming, I would have paid a lot more attention to my Python course. And I probably would have tried to, if I knew how much Python I would be doing now, I would absolutely have made it my goal to learn more. Because everything I do revolves around Python right now. Even if I'm running BAT files and scheduling tasks, those BAT files are calling a number of different Python files that have to be run sequentially or concurrently. I've automated the entire process of our address integration through a program called FME. I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with FME. FME is a wonderful, wonderful program, and our license is like $400 a year or something for the county. It's dirt cheap, and it can do amazing things. So if I had the option and I knew about FME, I might have gone back and learned some of that as well. And I definitely would have probably brushed up on my math skills. The statistical courses in the MSGIST program were, I wouldn't say over my head, but they were right here in terms of my math skill at the time. And I spent a lot of time of my own time doing things that weren't related to my projects in the class, just to wrap my head around the projects in the class in terms of what I was doing.
John, I wanted to return back to what you began with, which was the 911 system. And I know that that's been a huge project across the U.S. and within the state of Arizona as well. And I thought maybe you could just tell us a little bit about what does it mean to do GIS to improve a 911 system for the sheriff's department of your county?
So that is a whole podcast episode in itself. But to sum it up as easily as I can, so I sit as a voting member on a working group for the National Emergency Number Association, the Road Centerline Working Group, where we're coming up with standards for data attribution for road center lines. My coworker sits on the addressing working group on that, and then we both sit on the AGIC 911 group. So I'm heavily tied into all of the resources here, from the state land department all the way down to our local sheriff's department. And it really comes down to next generation 911 is going to be a point and polygon overlay, essentially. It's not going to be you're not going to call a dispatcher and the dispatcher is going to ask where your location is. When you call 911, I guess I should preface this with like 80% to 85% of all calls we get in our 911 system now come from wireless callers. And so there is that inherent location data already attached to the call, but currently not every phone service provider releases that. And so some agencies have to make agreements with the phone service provider to receive that data. And that usually happens in the form of a third-party contractor. And so Yavapai would contract with a company like Geocom or Motorola Solutions, and they would be able to retrieve that data from Verizon or T-Mobile. And then we would integrate that system into our system and take the real-time location of the caller and do a point and polygon overlay through all of these various boundaries to route calls. And so what happens is you have your city boundaries, then you have a layer called your emergency service number zones, which are a combination of law enforcement, fire response, and medical personnel, essentially. And all of these things overlap. And what's going to happen is you're going to call in and it's going to say, well, you're in the city of Prescott, but your fire department is Chino Valley Fire Department, but your EMS is Verde Valley Medical Center. And then it's going to automatically route you to the appropriate PSAP rather than you calling and someone being like, okay, let me transfer you to the Camp Verde primary service answering point. And so it's going to do away with all of the legacy systems and having to make the decisions in real time, having a human make decisions in real time. And so it's really just managing boundaries, polygon boundaries and attribution and how they relate to each other. One big thing is that the road center lines have to have a left side and a right side attribution, and this attribution has to reflect address ranges. And so the big thing that I have to do is manage these emergency service number zones, align them to road center lines, because the road center line has to have an ESN left and an ESN right value, and then that value also has to match the value of the address point. And so whenever this address gets geocoded correctly, it routes the correct road center line for routing purposes. And so it's really just a bunch of QA/QC on the attribution and geometry of all of these different layers that kind of tie together to make one system.
So along those lines, John, is Yavapai or your unit with the NextGen 911, do you have to liaison with the state and then the federal National Spatial Data Infrastructure when you're cleaning up like the center line and the address matching and stuff like that? Does that come into play for your job as well?
So not so much for me. That would be more at like the AGIC 901 level, would kind of try to do more of that political stuff and coordinate between groups and get everyone on the same page. My focus is much more local. And so I work with, all the towns and cities here. And so since I don't have the authority to, edit other people's data, what I do is I generate through my FME process, I QA/QC their data, and I automatically generate an Excel spreadsheet that gets kicked to me via email. And then I just forward that to whoever the addresses belong to have them fix the attribution. And then in terms of the attribution within the county that we do own, I am able to fix that and change that. And same with the road center lines. If the road center line belongs to a different agency, if it's the city of Prescott or city of Cottonwood or Prescott Valley, we kick those errors back to them and ask them to fix it. And there is an inherent benefit for them to fix it because I will not process errors and upload them to the sheriff system. And so if they send me a new subdivision and it's missing streets, I can't upload it to the sheriff system because they use a CAD routing system. And if the roads don't meet at the endpoints, then their routing system breaks. And so it's easier for them to just know that they have to go to a neighborhood rather than having their computer tell them that we'll go this way and take a left and then take a right, and then they end up on the opposite side of this neighborhood past a ditch where they can't access where they were needed to go in the first place. And so they do have an inherent, I guess inherent's not the right word. They do have, some form of reasoning behind fixing their data for us.
So when I was in Los Angeles, I remember speaking to a firefighter who took a class with me, actually. And he said one of the issues with kind of routing for them was that it followed, I guess, the traditional flow of traffic, which is not the case for firefighters because they could turn the siren on and go around. However, on many of the streets, there might not be, passable areas. And some streets there were. Do you know if there's, another database, I guess, for certain personnel who can pass traffic? And I guess maybe you guys don't deal with traffic nearly as much as I did in Los Angeles. But I'm just curious, how the database works with that and if there's differences in how you build it for routing and, because those are different challenges.
So I don't have much of a role in that. The sheriff department is broken up into two separate systems. So I support the dispatchers and I support their mapping system. But for in-vehicle routing systems, they use a system called Tritech CAD, which is pulled from my data, but I don't know what the post-processing is or what their CAD system. I don't get to touch that at all. And so I don't have any access to the in-vehicle routing solutions they have. My work is primarily on the dispatch side.
I'm also wondering, since you're, on the database side, I'm wondering, if you deal with alias names, because I know that's a common issue, trying to find where someone is and how they refer to these locations, how you deal with that. And then just kind of a follow-up, because I'd imagine that's a large challenge. What some of the biggest challenges for you have been over the past year in your position?
And so in terms of aliases, are you referring to aliases of what exactly?
Street names, referring like with nicknames, different names.
Sure. So we do have multiple different polygon layers. We have one for subdivisions, and the subdivision has its legal name, which could be like Arizona Juniper Woods Ranch Land Survey 35 section, blah, 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 whatever. And then we populate that with agreements from cartography and the parcel maintenance division to a subcommon field, which we would call just Juniper Wood Ranch, or even the subdivision of Walmart. That is a subdivision we have when Walmart owns, like 1 million square acres of property. And then in terms of roads, we actually have a lookup table, which is alternate road names. But we don't have too many of those. It's not a huge issue here, actually. We have, this is it's a big county, but it's a very rural county. And so there's not like a million different roads. Like, out of the 60,000 road centerline segments, I think only 25,000 of them are paved, and so over half of the names are just unnamed road. So it's not so much of an issue here. And we do have areas where we have like legacy systems that refer to a road by a different name because, 50 years ago, the road continued on, but now that road is split. And so it turns from Iron Springs to Whipple instead of it being a full Iron Springs road or something like that. But it hasn't been much of an issue for us in terms of what I've seen. We just have the lookup table that just pulls the values. And so it can search dually for either name essentially. And then what was your follow-up question? What was the challenges?
I was imagining, that could be a challenge maybe in a larger area, but yeah, some of your biggest challenges that you've had to work on or overcome over the past year.
Gotcha. It was really the biggest challenge was just that I didn't know anything about databases. I don't even know if I had ever looked at SQL Server Management Studio or done a SQL query ever before my job here. And I did have an introduction to Python through my coursework, so I was at least familiar with what the capabilities of Python were, but certainly not with the complexities that I deal with on a day-to-day basis here. And so really just wrapping my head around an enterprise geodatabase setup has been the hardest thing. We have probably close to 100 users working on this heavily versioned environment, working on grandchild versions of parent versions of a default version of the database. And so really just trying to wrap your head around what you're editing and trying not to mess with other people's edits while you're doing that has been a big challenge. That's something that's huge. And then aside from that, one of the other challenges has been really just trying to integrate myself into the 911 system. I did a project, my master's project was evaluating the ambulance response times here in the Verde Valley. And so I had familiarity with the National Emergency Number Association and with all these different aspects of the 911 system, but I had no work in the 911 system. I had never talked to anyone in the 911 system aside from reaching out to a handful of these PSAP administrators to kind of grab data for my project. And so, and I mean, as everyone knows, what you learn from a book and what you learn from real life are never congruent with each other. So trying to transition my learning that I had done for my project into applicable scenarios at my current job was also a big challenge because there's a lot more data that I get to work with. My analysis was very, very simple compared to the data that I work with on a day-to-day basis here.
So John, as an example of a successful MSGIST online student who was able to move on and get a career out of the program, I'm more curious, we've talked about skills and things that you found important, but like, if you had suggestions for incoming online students, like what would you do to make the experience the best for you while you're in the program? Like, did you have any tips on how you worked the program to make it best for you?
I think for students coming in, the first thing I would say is really just use the forums and talk to your not coworkers, but your peers. It can feel kind of isolating whenever you're working from home, if you live alone and you're by yourself, and then you're doing an online program, and there's no one around you. And you really want to be able to foster that sense of community in your peers and be able to have relationships with them. And it's not even for the sole purpose of talking to them in the program, but once you're out of the program, they're going to have jobs all over the world. That's also a form of networking. The more friends you can make in your program, the more people you're going to know in GIS at the end of your program, and the more opportunities you're going to have for yourself. And my number 2 thing would probably be set yourself up with like a regular schedule. It took me a minute to really find a groove, but dedicate 2 hours a night, maybe from 6 p.m. to 8 p.m., 3 days a week or 4 days a week, and really just have time set aside that, your friends, your family, your partners, they all know that you're busy during this time and you have responsibilities and you've committed to something that you need to do. That was a big challenge for me in the beginning, was keeping myself responsible and in check. And I never missed a deadline, but there were times when I was cramming before a deadline in my first couple classes telling myself I should have done this a week ago. And so really just stay on top of your coursework and set aside time to do it, and don't put it off till the end, because you don't want to do that.
For the online students, we do have actually a number of forums, and we've been expanding ways to try to get the community learning at a higher level. We have the Cartographic Cafe, sort of a community learning center for online students, but we've expanded out discussion forums in D2L are common in the learning management system. But we now run in Slate and Piazza and a few other ways to get that interaction going. So yeah, that's really important. And also, I think too, is just to, like you did, John, is to reach out to the faculty and make sure that you're not alone, and to use us, keep in touch and stuff. Because you and I, John, have kept in touch over the years, and I think that's helped us both in many ways too, because I like to know what's going on in the state and where alumni go, so that I can help network for new students. And if we have some students that have done E911 projects here in Tucson and elsewhere, as well as crime analyst types of projects too. So not thinking of us as just a school to learn at, but as a community network, I think is really important. And I appreciate that you pointed that out, John.
In terms of the forums, jumping back into that, I think that really giving your feedback to other people is so essential. I mean, obviously I learned a lot. The majority of what I learned was from the coursework developed by the professors, but I think even more importantly, were like the little criticisms you get from all of your cohorts in the program. When they're actually designing their own maps and then looking at your maps, I feel that they were able to provide such valuable feedback. And if you're not contributing back to that, you're really doing a disservice to yourself and to all of your peers. Even though you're not a professional, if you're in the program, you have so much valuable feedback to give to everyone in the form of constructive criticism.
Well, thank you for spending some time with us today, John. It was great to hear about what you've been up to and the fabulous work you're doing for Yavapai County. And we look forward to seeing you at future AGIC conferences and elsewhere, other meetups around the state.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll actually be giving a virtual talk this year at AGIC on terms of a fishbone analysis presentation. And if you guys want to see more about that before the presentation, you could find it on my website under my projects tab at johnehlen.com.
Great. Thanks, John.
Absolutely. Have a good one.